Welcome to NASPA Tonight. I'm your host, Josh Greenway. This is the weekly show where we cover all things Scrabble. Thanks so much for joining me. We've got a very special episode tonight. We're going to be focusing on America's favorite quiz show, Jeopardy. I have one piece of Scrabble news that I wanted to get out of the way first here. If you have watched this show before, you'll be aware of the Scrabble tournament that takes place in Albany on July the 4th. You'll know that with Annette Tedesco's unfortunate passing, that myself and Kieran O'Connor are keeping her legacy alive and keeping that tournament running. We've got a very special announcement this week, and that is that there is going to be a sort of for the final time, a July the 4th barbecue that will be hosted at Annette's house. If that's the sort of thing you like, I expect a big attendance at that event, then consider signing up for the July 4th tournament. That tournament listing is on Crosstables. Now, let's talk about Jeopardy. Let's talk about the Tournament Scrabble players who have appeared and won on Jeopardy. And here tonight to discuss that with me is my very special guest, Jeopardy expert, Andy Saunders. Andy, how are you?
I'm not too bad. Thank you so much for having me, Josh.
No, believe me, it's my pleasure. I want to let the people know, if they don't know already, what some of your achievements are in the trivia and Jeopardy field. Andy currently runs the Jeopardy fan site, the appropriately named The Jeopardy Fan. He has been interviewed and featured in many, many media publications talking about the biggest Jeopardy news items. Those media companies include the New York Times, the Washington Post, ESPN, The Atlantic, CTV News, CBC, As It Happens, and many, many more. He is also the creator of the Complete the List podcast, which is a trivia game show with over 110 episodes produced. You can find that podcast at completethelist.ca or all major podcast platforms. I'm a big podcast guy. I just listened to my first episode of Complete the List, and I very much enjoyed it. I give it definitely a recommendation, and it will not be the last episode I listen to. Andy has also recently traveled to Las Vegas to compete in large trivia events like America's Quizzing Championship and Geek Bowl 2019. He has also co-authored 2 books on baseball history and has under his belt 15 Tournament Scrabble wins. I can think of no better person to talk about Jeopardy and Scrabble together than you, Andy. So once again, thanks very much for joining me. I'm going to launch.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
Sorry. You've been talking a while. You went on and on about my resume there, Josh.
Absolutely.
But thank you.
It's a very impressive resume. So here's my first question for you. How did you get interested/involved with trivia? How long have you been doing this? Give me a little bit of background.
Okay, well, I mean, I've been a trivia fan and a Jeopardy fan, I would almost say all my life. My dad, when he was raising my brother and I, would, he'd tape Jeopardy and he'd watch them and we'd watch with him. And so, pretty much since the show has come back on the air in the mid-'80s, I've been watching. I mean, I don't remember the early episodes, obviously, but I've been watching the whole time. In high school, I played Reach for the Top.
Oh, okay. Is that like a trivia, like high school quiz bowl kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's still going on. It's May is usually the month they do the national championships for that. But yeah, so I played Reach for the Top in high school. That was kind of my first taste of competition. And I've been involved in trivia and that scene ever since. And in 2004, when, Ken Jennings' run got big, was kind of when I started being seen as a Jeopardy expert, I guess you could say. I was one of the founders of jarchive.com at that point.
Yes.
And was interviewed in a couple spots about Ken Jennings' run, and I've pretty much been a one of the diehards ever since that time, and have followed things really closely.
Now, Ken Jennings' run was 15 years ago. Is that what you're telling me?
I am telling you, Ken Jennings' run was 15 years ago. It's funny. I was talking with Jason Brosma about that last weekend, and he was just as surprised to hear Ken Jennings was 15 years ago.
That is unbelievable to me, because it feels like just a few years ago. Jim Brennan, that's a good point. We will. Jim Brennan says our lower thirds are covering our faces, so we move those out of the way. Now, you also, when I first got to know you, it was when I started traveling to Scrabble competitions in Guelph that you would run back to back with your own trivia events. And generally that would be in sort of a bar/restaurant. Can you tell us a little bit about your history of organizing, well, I don't know, both, I guess, but trivia bar nights in particular?
Well, I mean, back in 2008, I had a friend who was hosting karaoke at the time, and he had a bar. He was playing at a bar that was looking for a trivia host. And my friend, knowing, well, you know what, here's the guy who captained the Reach team at our high school, gave me a shout and said, "Hey, Andy, would you like to run music trivia?" And that's kind of how it started. I ran a music trivia night for 7 years. It eventually expanded into other types, general trivia, a general trivia night at that bar, and some others. And I mean, I still run a monthly night for trivia at a retirement home locally here in Guelph.
Oh, that's great.
And yeah, the residents really like it too, so that's really nice to see. Mm-hmm. They look forward to having me come in every month. So that's kind of. Yeah.
I'm sure that actually sounds really cool. Okay, I want to talk about the Jeopardy fan for a minute. So this can be found. What is the URL? The JeopardyFan.com or?
Right, the JeopardyFan.com.
Okay, and chin up here, Andy, because I'm going to put up the logo of the site. So for Jim Brennan, so he can continue to see us. So the Jeopardy Fan is a really cool site. What I love about it, I'm a big stats guy, and you guys have some really interesting metrics. So things like, and I don't know that you do this for every game, but I know that you're doing it for the current, Jeopardy hotness, James. Mm-hmm. I say James H because I don't know how to pronounce his last name. What is it?
Holzhauer.
Okay. So during his run, and again, I don't know if you do this all the time, but things like first to buzz in, you use a term like rebounds, stuff like you have a probability of how long the run will last. So I find that really interesting. And also, listen, I'm also a baseball history fan. So I wonder if that if one influences the other. Maybe you could talk about that a bit.
Well, I mean, I would say it certainly does. My starting out as a baseball fan meant that I loved keeping track of statistics, and it kind of carried over into the Jeopardy fandom a little bit. And a couple of these stats are ones I originally started tracking with Ken Jennings, and I've continued to track them at this point. The nice thing about J-Archive is that it basically it's not just the clues, it's the stats you can get from knowing the results of every clue in every game for the last 15 years. Like,
Right.
you can run the numbers and say, okay, if your score is, say, 15,000 going into Final Jeopardy, you've got about a 50% chance of winning the game. And just because 15, going back for the past 15 years, if your score is 15,000 going into Final Jeopardy, you have won 50% of those games. So you're able to take, just based off your score going into Final Jeopardy, you're able to predict how often you'll win a game of Jeopardy.
Right.
So much like the rating system for NASPA has the logistic curve depending on the difference in ratings and your chances of winning the game, you can do the same thing for Jeopardy, and that's kind of the basis for my prediction model. I take James's stats and his average score going into Final Jeopardy, use the standard deviation of those scores to kind of generate a whole bunch of random data, and use that to figure out how long I think his run will go.
Yeah, no, I think it's really cool, and I wanted to kind of separate the two things out. One is the JeopardyFan.com. I really suggest you go there. The other night, as I was doing research, I really went on the deep dive of the betting guide for Final Jeopardy. I thought that was really nicely laid out and cool. And just some of the, I guess, their proprietary stats. How are those stats being collected, by the way?
I mean, I basically, as a game airs, I have I don't know how well you can see this on my thing, but I've got I basically take a chart of the game and as I watch and use that to generate the stats. Hand counting works a lot of the time, just because there's a couple of things that I want to track that for JArchive doesn't put in, just because it's really hard to code into a database. But if you track it by hand, it works out pretty well.
Absolutely. So, okay, a couple quick things here. One, that looks very much like a baseball box score that you would fill in at the game. I'm curious, are you watching Jeopardy on a DVR and does it take you an hour because you're taking those stats, or are you keeping those stats in real time?
I'm keeping those stats in real time.
Amazing. Okay.
As I watch the show, yeah.
So, the Jeopardy fan, I would suggest everybody go there if you're a Jeopardy fan. That is an obvious place to go to see some great content. You're currently tracking James H's run comparatively game by game to Ken Jennings' run. So that's got some really interesting stuff. And the J Archive. Tell me a little bit about that, where people can find it and why they would go there.
Okay, so the site is j-archive.com, and basically that is a listing of the clues from as many Jeopardy games we have been able to find. It's basically, at this point, it's complete all the way back to 2003. And then before that, we've got a large number of previous games to that. But basically, pretty much everything that has aired since 2003, or we've been able to find from previous, the clues, the correct responses, the scores, the bets. Basically anything you'd want to know if you to recreate a game of Jeopardy.
Right, absolutely. I myself, in different offices that I've been in, have run little Jeopardy games for fun, and instead of making up any clues, because trivia is not my thing, I've just gone to JArchive, pulled the entire information, and then just cribbed from that. So it's definitely a useful resource. Let's talk about some of the interviews that you've done over the years. These are, I can guess, but maybe you have some information that I wouldn't be able to guess. The topics that you are usually sought out for, I imagine it's got to be when there are these contestants who are streaking, who enter kind of the national consciousness, as well as things like, obviously, Alex Trebek's health news. Is there any cool kind of interview stories or stuff that I haven't thought of that you've been sought out for?
I think the most interesting one back last October, in the middle of Austin Rogers' streak, actually, there was an incident where he pronounced the dessert item sherbet instead of sherbet. And he was not given credit because basically it was part of a clue where it had to fit in with sorbet. And, with the spelling ending in BET, basically the show associated the spelling, the alternate spelling with the alternate pronunciation, and basically didn't give him credit. The internet went wild, it went viral, and the next day I got an email from a reporter from the New York Times wondering about Jeopardy's pronunciation rules.
That is really cool. Let me ask you this. As an expert in this field, what do you think it is that draws people to trivia?
Draws people to trivia?
Like to participate in trivia. Like, is it the competition thing? Is it the idea of being able to show that you know more than your fellow human? Or is it more community-based? Like, I don't know. What are your thoughts on what draws people together for trivia?
Josh, I think that it's a little bit of both. There are some people who enjoy the camaraderie of it, and there are others who want to test themselves or test, themselves against other people. And, it really depends on the individual person. There are a lot of people who like to compete, and there are other people who like to, compete against themselves, as it were. And, yeah.
Fair. We've got a lot of people watching on Facebook. Certainly, if you're involved in trivia, if you love trivia, consider throwing into the comments why you love trivia. That would be number one. And number two, if you've got questions for Andy, please throw those into the comments. I'm trying to monitor all three Facebook channels that we are live on right now, and I will pass those along. Let's talk about kind of where Jeopardy and Scrabble intersects, because I think, like you say, a little bit of both competition, camaraderie. I think that's a pretty apt comparison for the people who play Scrabble as well. And I think I was certainly surprised when I started, the longer I was around Scrabble, to realize what kind of overlap existed between not only trivia and Scrabble, but Jeopardy and Scrabble. So maybe you can talk about your own experience. What do you think is sort of the common thread that runs through those two groups? Is it the same mix? Is it that the same type of person is attracted to both? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that both Jeopardy and competitive Scrabble both inherently attract people with above average intelligence. So from that perspective, I think that's kind of why you've got overlap. You'll see a lot of overlap between a lot of these endeavors, not just Scrabble, but you might see overlap between, chess and trivia, or crossword puzzles and trivia. There are a lot of people who are really into, competitive crossword solving who are also really into trivia. And, even overlap between the crossword puzzle community and Scrabble in a couple of cases as well. So,
for sure. Well, and I think that's interesting, and I think that's certainly true in your case. I don't know about mine, given your explanation there. But what I will say is that if you are a competitive crossword fan, you can certainly go check out on the NASPA Scrabble YouTube page an episode that I did with Jason Keller, who crosses over in a number of these different fields, where we compared the North American Scrabble Championship to the American Crossword. Oh my God, I
the American Crossword Puzzle Tournament.
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely. ACPT. Okay. Now, before we go, because what we're going to do tonight is profile the tournament players who have appeared on Jeopardy. I want you to tell us very briefly about your podcast, Complete the List. If you can give a brief description, and then I want to know why you think people should listen.
Okay, well, Complete the List, I came up with that just under 2 years ago now. And basically the idea was that, you've got lists or, categories where you've got lists of many possible answers, and the players try to name as many items off the list as they can. And, there's a couple of wrinkles. You've got a crib function where if the guy in front of you or the person in front of you happens to give your answer, you can repeat that answer and still get points for it. Fewer points, but still points nonetheless. And there's a doubling aspect.
That's
so
right.
If you have a wheelhouse category, you can double it and you can get double points. So that's basically the gist of it. There's a halftime round where I say, in what year did each of these, in what different year did each of these 8 events occur? And the final question, you've got to come within 10% of a specific number. It's a fun listen, and if you're looking for a more fast-paced trivia podcast, each episode usually runs between 30 to 45 minutes usually, which I would say, nothing against a lot of the other podcasts in the trivia genre, but this one generally tends to run slightly faster. So if you're looking at completethelist.ca and iTunes and any other major podcast service, all of those have Complete the List on it.
Absolutely. So, and that would include like Stitcher and Spotify and one other one that I can't remember. But
it's on Google Play as well.
Okay, very good. So let's very quickly, let's talk about the baseball history books. What are the titles of those books, and give us one thing that makes you love baseball above all other sports, which I'm assuming is true, but who knows?
That is true. My 2 books. The first one is titled As Bad as It Gets. It's a history book co-written with Scrabble player John Robertson about the 1916 Philadelphia A's. They went 36 and 117. That's the worst winning percentage of any team since 1900. And you know what? Depending on how bad the Marlins do this year, they may challenge that. We'll see how their season goes. But they are not having a good season so far.
Gotcha. Here we'll go lightning round with some viewer questions. Heidi Robertson wants to know: did you personally agree with the Sherbert ruling?
I personally, at the time, I did actually agree with it, just because the way the clue was worded, it required sherbet spelled B-E-T, and their dictionary didn't have the Sherbert pronunciation spelled S-H-E-R-B-E-T. So I did agree with the ruling, yes.
Okay. Zev Kaufman wants to know: any plans to revive the Sunday Guelph Scrabble tournaments?
You know what, Zev? I'd love to at some point. One thing I found, though, is that I've got so busy, covering all the Jeopardy stuff, that I lost the ability to have time to go to clubs to actually promote the tournaments. So I found that when I was promoting, my attendance was better, so I feel like I'd need to have the time to promote the tournaments properly before I could start running them again.
All right. And I can appreciate the lack of time, the fact that you're putting out Complete the List every week. And there's obviously a lot more prep that goes into that than NASPA Tonight. But I am familiar with the grind of putting out content every week. Jim Brennan wants to know your favorite player. So I imagine, that could be baseball or Scrabble, but I think what he means is your favorite Jeopardy player of all time. Do you have one?
That is a very good question. My favorite Jeopardy player of all time. I could tell you who my favorite Jeopardy interview is, because I've done some interviewing in the past of some players. but I don't know if that's specifically my favorite player. I think I'd have to go with Alex Jacob in terms of favorite player. Okay. Just, he was kind of the closest to James Holzhauer in terms of being able to put all the strategy together before James did it. And so I really enjoyed watching Alex play his strategy. I was actually heartbroken a little bit when his team lost before the finals of the recent Jeopardy All-Star Games a little bit. So I was very disappointed that they did not make the finals because of, what happened with Alex's Daily Double on the Pulp Fiction Daily Double. So I would have to say Alex Jacob.
Okay, very good. And, okay. I wanted to get to the profiles already. We're going to do that in a minute. Very quickly, Jim Brennan wanted to correct favorite baseball player of all time. Do you have one off the top of your head?
Favorite baseball player of all time. Oh, my. Roberto Alomar.
Beautiful. There you go. Okay, and very quickly, because you've given interviews on this subject, so I think it would make sense to share your opinion here on James's current run. I believe your opinion is that he's like pushing the envelope in terms of playing the game as well as it can be played, but give me your brief take on his current run.
Well, I mean, he's, as you said, he's been the one player who's been able to play the game as close to perfectly as possible. He's got the buzzer timing down absolutely perfectly almost. He seems to be able to signal at will. Ask any of the people we profile tonight or later on tonight, that signaling device is easily the most difficult part of it. He's figured that out, and he's been able to use that success to control the game the way he wants and put, almost $1.7 million after 22 games. That would have been unheard of 2 months ago.
Right, absolutely. Okay, let's get into the Scrabble players. We're going to go through some Scrabble. We're going to start with Scrabble players who were on the show quite a while ago. So we may not have they may not be fully detailed in J archive, but we want to recognize as many Scrabble players as possible. Hopefully this is a close to complete list. I would not be shocked if something was missing from this list, but we're going to do the best we can here. So we're going to kind of cruise through the first few, and then as we move through the list, sort of in the second half of the list, Andy is going to, we're both going to add some commentary about those players, stuff that I've either researched or know about them, and Andy's going to give us a little bit of Jeopardy insight into their time on the show. So let's start that process with Carol Miller appeared on Jeopardy. I don't actually know the year, but I really like this picture. You're covering it, but she's blowing out a birthday cupcake. Any idea of when Carol was on the show?
It's interesting because I was brainstorming with Judy Cole over the weekend when we agreed to this interview, trying to figure out as many people as we could find that had been on Jeopardy. And I personally had been unaware that Carol had been on, but Judy brought her up. And so I'm pretty sure her run is not in J Archive at this point. So
gotcha.
We don't have a lot of it. I think we have about the least amount of information for Carol as compared to anyone else.
Okay, so let's move on to Cecilia Westbrook Huber, who appeared on Jeopardy in 1990. Cecilia's awesome and has been on the Scrabble circuit for pretty much the entire time that I have been. We should also talk about Frank Tangretti. I could not find a Jeopardy picture, but I found this picture from when he appeared on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire in 2000. And I thought it would be interesting to ask you this, Andy. You see the trivia question up on the screen. What do you think the right answer is?
I'm pretty sure that the answer is Al Gore.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. I meant to research the answer, but I'm going to take your word for it. Let's move on to Patty Harwick. Oh, I should do this full screen. I don't want to cover up Patty's lovely smile. So Patty Hardwick, again, here, I'm not sure what year Patty appeared on the show, but she is another Tournament Scrabble player who has appeared there. And let's see. Oh, and Jason Keller with breaking news says original Art Fleming. So, Andy, do you think that means that Patty appeared on the show when it was Art Fleming hosting?
I think that sounds like it would be the case, yes.
Okay, very good. Thanks for that, Jason. Okay, we've got Carol Denton, who was a 3-game winner back in 1995. And Cecilia also gave us a comment confirming that Patty was on when Art Fleming was the host. So there you go, double confirmation. So Carol Denton, 3-game winner. Then let's move on to, we've got Wes Eddings, who appeared on Jeopardy in 2000. He's one of the Scrabble and Jeopardy players that I was not able to tag because Wes Eddings does not play along with Facebook or other social media. I really like Wes. Wes one time gave me a ride to the airport. Really nice guy and hell of a Scrabble player.
I've played him a couple times in Scrabble too. He's an excellent player.
Absolutely. Here's another guy, Kurt Davies. He's a lot of fun to hang around with for sure. He appeared on Jeopardy in 2008. And let's get into, this is a player that I do not know. Maybe you can tell us something about him, but David Weiss also appeared on Jeopardy in 2008.
Yes, I mean David Weiss is actually, if I'm not mistaken, he was a member of NASPA's steering committee at one point. And
okay.
But yeah, David was in fact on Jeopardy in 2008. From what I recall, and this will be a theme as we go through some of my profiles based on my notes, David did pretty well until Final Jeopardy and got tripped up by a Final Jeopardy clue. So had things just been a little bit different, he might have been a Jeopardy champion.
Okay, here we go. We've got Andrea Carla Michaels, who appeared on Jeopardy in 1988. I think what's interesting here, and Carla actually messaged me while we were on the air, asking me to use a different picture. I think this is a lovely picture, Andrea. We just became Facebook friends, so I'm sorry I wasn't able to change up the picture from the time that I got your message. But I think it's really cool that Andrea, from what I looked at, also appeared on Wheel of Fortune, on Merv Griffin's Crosswords, is obviously at the ACPT there, and is also being a contributor to the New York Times Crosswords section. So that's a pretty impressive game show and crossword, and trivia resume. What do you think?
Well, I mean, from what I've read about her Wheel of Fortune experience, she did. I would say she did a lot better on Wheel than she did on Jeopardy. Okay. She was an excellent Wheel of Fortune player. When she played Jeopardy, she had the misfortune of going up against Kevin Freer, and in their game, Kevin set what was then a one-day record of $27,800. That was before the dollar amounts got doubled. So in today's dollars, that would have been, $55,600. I mean, That's an off day for James Holzhauer, but prior to that, that still holds up as one of the top scores of all time. So.
For sure. So let's move on to KC, and honestly, I know who Casey is. We're Facebook friends, but I don't know that we've met in person. So I always mispronounce last names. Do you know how Casey pronounces her last name?
Casey Ferdima.
Okay, Ferdima. Very good.
So
she appeared on Jeopardy in 2011. Take it away, Andy. What can you tell us about Casey's experience?
Well, I mean, you mentioned the Final Jeopardy betting section of the JeopardyFan.com. I originally wrote that to help Casey prepare for her experience on the show.
Oh, great.
And the champion that she went up against ended up winning 4 games and qualifying for the Tournament of Champions. Casey actually led her game going into Final Jeopardy, and as the theme goes, got tripped up by a slightly more difficult than normal Final Jeopardy clue. Many people in her circle still refer to, put a word that I'm not going to say on this broadcast in front of Parson Weems. So,
okay, well, that sounds like some inside baseball there. I don't totally get the reference. Okay, so the next person we're going to talk about is former NASPA Person of the Year, Judy Cole, who appeared on Jeopardy in 2013. I am lucky enough to co-chair a NASPA committee with Judy. She is one of my favorite people in NASPA, certainly very, very impressive. What can you tell me about Judy's time on Jeopardy?
Well, again, she had the misfortune of playing against a really strong player, Andrew Moore. Ended up winning 6 games in his own right. I think Judy was on the 5th one. The nice thing about Judy's episode, though, it came on the Friday of the 2013 Canadian National Scrabble Championship. So I had been fortunate enough to obtain a recording of the episode after it aired, and a whole bunch of Scrabble players got the opportunity to watch her game over a lunch break that year at the CNSC.
Cool. Very good. Okay, let's move on to Dorcas Alexander. Dorcas is one of the nicest people you can meet in Scrabble. Can you tell us a little bit about her Jeopardy experience in 2016?
Yeah, so again, Dorcas probably had a case of what might have been. Jeopardy fans might recognize the name Seth Wilson. He appeared in the most recent All-Star Games after he won a dozen games. Well, he was the other challenger the same day as Dorcas, and Dorcas was leading. Unfortunately, Dorcas did not get Final Jeopardy. Seth did, and Seth went on to win 11 more games after that. So, again, it seems like Scrabble players have some bad luck in a lot of cases when it comes to Final Jeopardy.
All right. Let's move on to a 2-day champion. This is Mark Edelson, who appeared in 2006. Now, I play at the same club, the Toronto club, as Mark, and had played in the same club for a few years before learning that he had been on Jeopardy for 3 days. And I remember going, oh my God, not only is this guy right up at the top in terms of performance at the club, I think that was, one of the first times that I learned about this sort of Jeopardy and Scrabble subset, and just remember being blown away that he had been on the show. What can you tell me about Mark's 3-day run on Jeopardy?
So Mark, again, as I've mentioned a few times, he also struggled with Final Jeopardy a little bit. He unfortunately went 0 for 3 in his 3 games, but he did win a couple because his first game, he managed to get a runaway before Final Jeopardy. He had the game sewn up. Beautiful. It was almost a runaway in his second, and, again, a stretch of tougher than normal Final Jeopardies. In his first 2 games, none of the players in the game got the Final Jeopardy correct, so...
Gotcha. So, and had the lead and held on in that particular case.
Right. And then, unfortunately, he missed the one on day 3. If I'm not mistaken, he was leading on day 3 as well. And had he gotten it correct, he would have won. But unfortunately, he did not. And his run ended at 2.
Well, let's talk about another 2-day champ, and that would be Jason Idalski, who is certainly known to a lot of players for his division director work at the North American Scrabble Championship. also taking on some directing duties for some of the certainly Michigan tournaments and probably in that region. And obviously a very fine Scrabble player as well. What do you have to say about Jason?
Well, it's interesting because I think, Jason doesn't really fit the theme of the rest of the players as much. He actually won a couple of games. He had some big daily double bets in his 2 wins, and those propelled him to victories. I think from he's spoken with me a little bit about his games afterwards. He fancied himself as a bit of an underdog and felt that he needed to bet big on the daily doubles to have a chance. And he did, and it worked out for him. And unfortunately, in his 3rd game, he didn't get any of the daily doubles and did not have as much success in terms of winning that game.
Okay, let's talk about former NASPA Tonight, many-time former NASPA Tonight guest. I want to get your take, Andy, on Jason Keller's 9-day, I guess he would have been on for 10 days, but 9 game wins, his big run on 2011. So, Andy, give me a breakdown on that.
Well, I mean, certainly Jason Keller is the most prominent Scrabble player to have been, to have done well on Jeopardy. 9 wins, $213,000 in December of 2011. He made the Tournament of Champions semifinals that year, or not that year, but in 2013. The categories seemed to fit one of his opponents better in the Tournament of Champions. So unfortunately, things didn't work out for him there. The guy he lost to, Dave Leach, went on a bit of a run in his own right. So he won. Dave Leach won a few games. The thing I liked most about Jason's run, it happened about the same time as the Albany Scrabble tournament that year. So we were actually able to have a viewing party in the middle, right after an early bird of the Albany tournament to watch Jason's final game.
Fantastic. And here's a surprise for all our viewers. Here he is, none other than 9-day champion Jason Keller. Jason,
Hello.
How are you?
I'm all right. There is a major thunderstorm going on right now.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, what do you think? Did Andy give a good summary of your time on Jeopardy?
Yeah, I'd say really, as far as it goes, I know I got a little bit lucky. It wasn't that the categories didn't suit me. It was more that one category did not suit me. And I think that that's something, I feel like I'm kind of a Jeopardy black sheep in a way. I'd say that, actually, I heard you talking about, James Holzhauer and Alex Jacob. When I went on the show, I was thinking a lot of the great champions that I had watched myself. So I was thinking of more like the Dan Melia's and Bob Harris's and Claudia Perry's, the people who I really identified and was like, wow, these people are awesome. And so I wanted to kind of play my game that way. And so, in that sense, and, also just as far as, considerations, that was, I know that one thing, having just everyone watching, and, like I said, we all got together at Kelsey's. Annette Tedesco was really great about just arranging everything. She made me give a speech before the main event. Which, of course, still, excluding James, I am technically the winningest player to not have been invited to a super tournament, but I've definitely let them know about that.
What, Andy, can you interpret the last comments that Jason just made? Because I don't understand them.
Yeah.
What does he say?
So basically what he's saying, you've got the list of all-time Jeopardy winners by money, and everyone ahead of Jason on the list has been to a super tournament.
Yeah, so
Jason
Battle of the Decades, the All-Stars, yeah, we don't have enough time on this program to talk about some of the more outspoken things and candid things that I would say. But yeah, I kind of hold that distinction, and I'm holding out hope.
Oh, good. Okay, that's interesting. So one thing I want to say, Jason, just a tiny little thing. You may want to try to just jostle your headphone cords, because I can hear myself feeding back, so I may be coming out of your speakers. But you're coming through clear as a bell. I think that may have fixed it there. Maybe not. Anyway, so we are getting close to the end of the profiles. Jason, if you'll hang out with us for this last profile, let's go and talk about. Let's talk about David Madden, 19-game winner, 2005. Andy, can you give us a little bit of a summary?
Well, I think David is probably the most surprising addition to this list, because I think a lot of people don't realize he was a Scrabbler.
Yep.
But David actually played in 4 or 5 tournaments around the turn of the century, and came back after his streak to play Albany New Year's in 2005.
Yep.
I think, if I remember correctly, NSA's Scrabble News mentioned it even. But yeah, basically, David, you've got he's been back in the news. He played in the All-Star games. He had the 3rd longest streak before James Holzhauer. So basically, there were also a few people who would even credit David with really being the first one as well, a little bit, to, actively hunt down daily doubles. Just because there seemed to be, it seemed like he was seemed to always find the daily doubles really quickly in his games. And that's one thing that, people like Roger Craig and Alex Jacob and even James Holzhauer a little bit have expanded on that, what Dave started, to basically, improve their own games.
So, Jason, I'm going to ask you now to. I'm going to try to manually manage. The audience can hear a little bit of feedback, or a little bit of echo, I should say. So I'm just going to manage that from my end. But Jason, you'll be able to be heard, but it'll be kind of, I'll ask a question and then turn your volume on. So Jason, tell us what you think about David Madden's run and whether you remember it. I mean, that is, well, I guess that was before you came on, but go ahead.
Well, so a couple of things. Fun fact, David Madden does still make the occasional appearance at the Princeton Scrabble Club. He does come in and visit every so often, so you have a lot of Jeopardy wins and Jeopardy appearances in the same club. Actually, the first time... I actually had met David playing Quiz Bowl in college, so we'd known each other from that, kind of. Interestingly enough, actually at one of my auditions, my story was that David Madden played a 102-point play on his first turn against me, and I won the game. So we got that. I said, one thing was just kind of, especially back in the day, I was just like, yeah, that's pretty awesome that it happened. I thought his strategy was actually very interesting because it's kind of different from the others. I think that he played a lot for, okay, you know what? If I have the advantage on the board, I'm going to make it so that you have to beat me on the board. He made a lot of low daily double waiters. So he was saying, if you're gonna catch me, you're gonna catch me on the board. You've actually gotta, get more correct responses, get more cash than I did. When he eventually lost to another fantastic trivia player, Victoria Gross, fantastic person as well. But yeah, like she went in, she was ahead and she went in all in on a daily double, and that was a lot of the difference, if I recall correctly. But I think also, like me, I mean, I remember when I was prepping for the Tournament of Champions, I was looking at past Tournament of Champions, and I don't say this lightly, but when I looked at that Tournament of Champions and I looked at the game that he lost, I kind of had one of those, like, Sesame Street, one of these things is not like the others moments when I was looking over that game. But so I think, great player, was very happy to see his team win the All-Stars. Not that it was a complete shock to anybody, but was very happy to see his team win the All-Stars. And, it's always good to see him, when he does drop into the Princeton club.
Very good. And very quickly, Jason, and then we're going to move on to wrap up the show with Andy. But Jason, can you give us your view on James's current run? That's the biggest story in Jeopardy right now. So give us what your thoughts are.
As I said, I mean, I know that it's something, candidly, I think that some of this, I would say, and it's funny because I know that we don't like to kind of get around this. I mean, it's very impressive, but at the same time, there's part of me that says, like, content-wise, like, some of the things when I'm looking over, I'm just like, really, this is a $2,000 clue, or really this is, and I know that it's not a very prevalent thing, but I think it's something that I'd really actually be interested to look at it in a more systematic way, because I know that there have, some people have maybe wondered out loud, is there, how have the clues gone? And I've actually thought, now that there's a lot of stuff out there, there could actually be kind of a systematic analysis of, well, how have the distributions of categories and how have the clues changed over time?
Okay, I'm going to ask Andy to respond to that. Is the show grooving any pitches for James? What are your thoughts? Hold on. Sorry, Jason, you're muted for a second. Andy, go ahead.
Sorry. I wouldn't say that the show is grooving pitches for James. However, I will say this. I was doing some research for another interview another thing that's coming out in the next couple of days for someone else. And I was intrigued enough that I'm going to run my own analysis on it by the end of the week. It seems like Season 35's clues as a whole, Daily Doubles, Final Jeopardy, the normal clues, have, on the whole, seemed to be a little bit easier. And so it feels like this may be a perfect storm of just, almost like a juiced baseball, if you'll pardon the baseball
as opposed
analogy.
to a grooved pitch, right? Let's sorry. I'll let Jason clarify my comments. I was sort of just going.
That's
go ahead,
actually,
Jason.
Well, I agree with what Andy is saying. I mean, that's one thing that I know. I felt like I noticed it between when I appeared regular season and when I appeared in the Tournament of Champions. That I really felt like, and I felt like I could actually, pick out specific clues and say, this is why I believe it, or this is why, and not in like an opinionated sort of way, but here's like an objective reason why this clue is easier than that clue. And I think it's interesting. I don't know if Andy, if you're going to be doing some sort of analysis of that, but I would like to see that. And it is something, I mean, I'll say it. I know that it's been very impressive what his string of Final Jeopardies has been, but I can't say that, like, personally, I've gotten every single Final Jeopardy that has been, and in short order, every single Final Jeopardy that he's been given. So, as I said, it would be interesting to see, like, a more systematic analysis of that.
Andy, thoughts? Same as before?
Yeah, same as before. Like, I mean, the data that I have, even compared, I would almost say that if Ken Jennings were to have faced, the season 35 set of questions in season 20, comparatively, he probably would be putting up similar numbers to James. So,
Okay.
At
here's
least,
what-
you know,
Sorry.
at least in terms of, you know, not as much in terms of daily double wagering, but at least in terms of how well he'd be doing with the board material.
Okay, here's what we're going to do. Jason, we're going to let you go. Thanks very much for joining
I was
us.
just going to quickly say I think it's interesting, and it's definitely a separate conversation. But one thing, I feel like there are a lot of people who might have done well, who might have been at a disadvantage on season 35. But yeah, I've got to go.
Okay, let's... there we go. No, that's just you guys. Okay, there we go. Thanks very much,
There you go.
Jason, for jumping in on the show. I think this has been a really cool show, and certainly for the Jeopardy heads out there, I don't know if that's a term or not. I think that there's been some cool stuff. So, Andy, let me ask you this: what's next for you between the Jeopardy fan, complete the list, other trivia activities? What do you have coming up?
Well, at this point, my plan is hopefully I'll be able to play the Niagara Falls tournament in June, the big international Collins tournament there. I mean, the teachers tournament is on Jeopardy right now, so I get a couple of weeks break from covering James. I mean, I still obviously am covering Jeopardy, but it's probably a slightly easier schedule for me. Also, I've got some work with Reach for the Top coming up. I do a little bit of work for them every year, and the Ontario Provincial Finals and the Canadian Nationals are coming up in the next month, so I'll be doing a lot of work with that, but that's about what's on my plate for the next little while.
Fantastic. So, Andy, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for bringing your expertise and your view on this subject. Thanks, everybody, for watching. We ran a little longer than I was expecting to tonight, but I hope you, all of you out there, agree with me that this was a particularly fun topic and that we got some really interesting insights out of it. NASPA Tonight will be back next week, Tuesday night at 9 p.m. with an all-new topic, all new guests. So please come around and tune in. Certainly, as I always like to say, support your local Scrabble director. They're working hard for you. And Andy, thanks very much again, and I'm sure we'll see you soon.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
All right. And with that, we'll say goodnight. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Good night.